Today, I think what we are touching upon is really one of the most important elements of our society, which is how do we keep knowledge in a way that it is accessible to the people, to young people, to all people who want to know. Because increasingly, knowledge has a price that you have to pay to acquire. To get knowledge, you have to pay a price. Either schools, colleges, public schools, government schools, easier. Otherwise, private education, you pay a price. And universities, private universities, you pay a much higher price. Government, etc., much less price. But to access knowledge, you need books. You need to supplement the knowledge you get from your teachers with books. How do you get these books? How much does it cost? And what role do libraries play in this? You want to translate now? Or after I speak. So the first question is that knowledge, whatever form it is in, it is not free. It has a price. It has a price when it is written? No. It has a price when it is sold and reproduced. That is a price. That means the cost is not the cost of the book, it's really the cost of the reproduction. This is particularly important today because you see what used to happen, say, 500,000 years back. Books were written by hand. So books had to be copied. Copying of the books was costly because people who could copy had to know what they are copying, and very few people were literate in those days. So those who could write spent a year to produce one copy of a book. It was costly. So what happens or what liberates this is, first is the printing press. It makes it possible to produce books in bulk, and it creates for us the possibility of public knowledge being publicly more easily accessible. And that's where the libraries really come in, because again, people couldn't buy books, couldn't buy all the books they wanted to read. So libraries are created as a part of commerce, where people can come and access information. And the district libraries, university libraries, school libraries, all of this essentially are a part where knowledge is available relatively freely, cheaply, provided you have an interest to access that knowledge. Now, if we come today, we will find that if you want advanced knowledge, you want research, in an university like, for instance, where we are sitting, Kannur University, then knowledge is again expensive because the libraries that have to get the latest journals can't get those latest journals because they're very expensive. They're not meant for essentially poor universities. They're meant for rich universities which have the money. So again, we are finding that while knowledge is created by public funds, most of what comes in the journals are really generated by universities, research institutions, all publicly funded. But when it gets into finally the research output, which is in a journal, then that becomes captured by the organization that prints those journals. And in fact, today, most of the research publications in the sciences particularly are owned by a few publishing houses who have a monopoly. So that knowledge which is publicly created then becomes again enclosed. And this is why you have movements against it which says this is publicly created, this should belong to us. And various movements are there, but one which is interesting and important for us today is what is called the piracy movement. The piracy because there is what is called Sci-Hub. I don't know how many in the universities here use it, but Sci-Hub for science students anywhere in the world, including the United States, is a ready-made resource by which they can access the latest papers. Similarly, there is something called LibGen, which operates by which books can be downloaded, and researchers in most countries, including advanced countries, depend on these resources because they don't want to buy all the books. They want to see, is this book really worth buying, or do I just need a few pages of it? And therefore, how do students, forget others, how do students access books and journals? The libraries are today, if they have to get all of this information, all the books, all the journals in, it's prohibitively expensive. Forget us. Even the most rich universities in the United States said we can't afford it. So if that is the condition, what we are seeing is what Marx talked about much earlier when he talked about land. Enclosure of public land. So what is happening is, this is an enclosure at a very large scale of knowledge which is publicly created but enclosed by private capital. So that is one part of it. The second part of it, and I think this is the more important part today, is that this is being done at a time when the cost of reproduction, the cost of production of a book is high, because author takes years to write it. Research that is done takes years to be generated in a form which then may go into a book. So the cost of production of knowledge is high, but the cost of reproduction, that is very cheap. Why? Because it's electronic. Even when you produce a journal, or you produce a paper, or you produce a book, it's electronically first composed. It's composed digitally. And copies of those, electronic copies of those, are really extremely, almost at zero cost. Because essentially, if a repository is there, you actually recreate it on your computer. So it's not that it is something which is being copied by somebody else. You are doing the copy. But this cost of this whole exercise is very small. Here is the question. Earlier, we used to go to libraries to get books which you could not buy. Today, what can the libraries do in order to make that same access possible, which earlier they could do only for in a limited sense? Assume that a library could make accessible, without us having to resort to what is called technically piracy, could access books which you want to read, access journals which you want to read, make it available the way a library makes available. You issue it out, read, put it back, bring it back. What is the model that we can have, particularly when you have a library congress, that how do we look at the digital commons if you are a library? My assumption is all knowledge actually belongs to commons. It does not belong to the publisher. It belongs to the universities and the governments which have funded the research and the researchers, those who have paid for the education of the scientist or the researcher concerned. And the product that is supposed to be a journal article is not what is produced because it's printed by the journal, but is a product of all that research which has been funded publicly. So that is an enclosure of a kind which we have to fight against. Yes, Sci-Hub is an attempt to fight that. In fact, its popularity all over the world, including India, is because of that. By the way, there is a case which is going on in India against Sci-Hub, by which the publishers have said Sci-Hub should not be made accessible in India, it should be blocked. I am also a party in that case because we have protested against it, so we are in court against it. But it's a battle that we are fighting. Mainly because knowledge today is being enclosed. And if we want science and research in India, other researchers, social sciences, all other researchers, then what is the role library can play in order to expand this commons? So I will say that the real challenge today is for the library movement to create a digital commons which is a shared space which libraries can use the same way physical libraries do, interlibrary borrowing, interlibrary lending. What you need to do in order to protect ourselves from the copyright laws is to see that how many copies come for interlibrary lending or borrowing. The numbers is commensurate with the number of licenses available on the network. Now, a whole bunch of things have also fallen out of print. You will not be surprised to hear that a whole bunch of extremely valuable literature, both in social sciences and in other areas today, are not available because nobody is printing them. The cost of printing, not enough sales. How do you recover that knowledge so that that is available in a way to the libraries? I look at, for instance, some things I have to write. I look at history books which are 50 years, 60 years old. Nobody is reprinting them. They're still extremely valuable for us. How do we access them? So there are internet libraries available which will issue that book out to you for a limited period. Okay? And then you have to put it back or reissue it again. They have a number of copies which they hold, paid copies they hold, and they issue this out to people who want it. Now, we can therefore, even within the, confines of the capitalist laws of copyright, which by itself has lots to be said against, particularly with respect to knowledge creation, in which the publishers have very little role. But leaving that out, one simple thing is, how can a library movement create the digital common space the same way we used to use the libraries when we were young, to go to libraries, issue out books, or read over there things which otherwise we could not have bought or even have imagined that it exists. So this whole space, which has been enlarged so much more by the power of digital technology, almost instant reproduction, by the power of communication, almost instantaneous communication to any repository you want, provided you as a community of scholars, researchers, library users know how to reach it. We should be able to reach this the same way we can reach our library stack. How do you make this available is a challenge. Is the technology challenge difficult? No, it's not a technology challenge because the technology already exists. Internet archives are there which do exactly this. Even as I said, keep track of how many copies they have physically. So they can say we have only issued out copies we have and they don't exceed that. If they want, it goes beyond that, they say not today, tomorrow. You can block it, we'll give it to you tomorrow. Exactly like the libraries did. So all that is technically also possible because as long law is there, we have to fight the law, against the law, but we also have to fight within the law. So how do you do this? This challenge is something, I think, since you have taken an enormous step forward with the Library Congress, I think this is something as a challenge which the Library Congress should do. And I think already my credentials as a free software movement person was presented here. Yes, this is something which is also dear to the commons, larger commons movement, which free software movement is a part, that the library commons is something that we have to examine, and this is a challenge that I'm going to leave to Professor Ravindranath because he holds an important position here, so he should perhaps take the responsibility to see how these two things can be brought together. Thank you.